Oh.
Howdy, group.
Hi.
Hey, everyone.
Hey, Joe, it looks like you made it onto the Zoom meeting. We're still getting gathered together.
Okay, how's the audio?
Sounds fine to me.
Sounds good.
Have the big mic tonight.
Okay. I'm using the cheap computer version of microphone. Hopefully I'm fine as well. I'm Tom.
Very good.
Well, good evening.
Hi.
Hey.
Oh. And Carol, you can see my special clock behind me. It's got a history behind it. I call it the Doomsday Clock.
Oh my.
Is it counting up or counting down?
Well, it's showing Zulu time, but it was actually for 10 years was the world's doomsday clock.
It actually had that role.
Yes, it did.
Cool.
It came from Stratcom when they moved the command center in November, and a friend of mine was decommissioning the old place, and it was marked declassified for disposal. So he gave it to me knowing I would like a Zulu clock, and then showed me a picture of where it was and told me that it was set up for 3 modes there. It has a lot more modes in it, but their computer had it set for 3 modes. One is Zulu time, one is outgoing, and the other is incoming.
What is outgoing and incoming time, if I may ask?
Missiles.
Ah,
Wow.
It was on the wall in the Stratcom Global Command Center in Bellevue, which is Omaha area. And it was, if the missiles were launched, this would be counting down the time for them to call the president and tell him how long he's got.
Wow.
And so it's kind of an interesting piece to have on my wall.
I
Fair
understand
enough.
now.
Well, stop the clock.
Yeah.
I most definitely understand the doomsday reference then that we could initiate it, huh?
Yep. So once I get a controller built for it that I can use to synchronize it, I'm going to have a hidden button under my desk. So when I'm doing Zooms, I can push a button and it'll switch and start counting down and say incoming, time to impact. And what's ironic is I'm playing with the device that did that for real.
Wow.
Good evening, guys.
Good evening. How's it going?
Howdy.
Yeah, I think definitely Offutt Air Force Base would be one of those targets.
Yes, and that's where it was, off at Air Force Base.
I just don't want to interrupt anything, but I have a question for Carol.
You'd almost give us the impression you were a tinkerer, a gadget guy.
Yep, that's me.
Can I ask Carol a question about the slow scan television?
Yeah.
Both Bob and I, yesterday and today, we got the signal from 145.8, and
Yeah.
beautiful, but I could not decode it. I noticed that you said it was the 120 decode, and the program that I have doesn't have that mode.
Well, then you have to get another program that has PD 120.
Yeah, can you tell me which? I recorded it on the telephone, so maybe I can still recover it. Can you tell me a program that I could use?
Yeah, the MMS STV works on IBM PC type. I don't know what will work on Mac.
No, I have a PC, and that's the program I have. Maybe I have an old version.
Yeah, the MMS, all of them have the PD 120. What you need to do is either click on auto when you're
Yeah.
trying to decode it, or else you can right click one of the other buttons and you can select PD 120. It's one of the
Okay.
options there, but you have to
Yeah.
right click on the button, you can bring it up.
Yeah, I had it on auto. I'll play with it a little bit. Thanks. Okay, back to net.
What's
All right.
the program again?
Back to regular programming. All right, well, it's 7:32. We've got a bunch of people who have joined, so we can get started. Let me just share this first and do a quick intro. All right. Well, tonight we got a guest speaker, Joe Eisenberg, K0NEB, has agreed to join us and give a presentation on kit building techniques. So we're looking forward to that. But first we'll do our regular club business and just get that taken care of. We get on to the main topic. So Phil, do you want to give us our membership and treasury update for this month?
I certainly can. We're currently sitting at 146 paid members. And I wish to note that we're starting to receive 2021 dues payments. Thank you very much. There's a number who have come forth and paying a little bit early. For those of you who are unaware of it, if you pay your dues after September, the end of September, it covers the current year and the incoming year as well. So if you're a new member, there's a benefit to it. If you're an old member, we love you for it. And I understand that Bob N6PGQ will give you a big wet sloppy kiss if you pay early. Do you agree to that, Bob?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I get in line right after you.
And we've received a little bit of money in the month of October. So currently our balance is $8,164.47, of which $2,785.83 is in the repeater fund. And that pretty much covers my reports.
All right, thank you. All right. Carol, do you have a website update this month?
Okay, yes, I'm Carol, KP4MD, and I'm webmaster, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen if it's okay.
Yep, got it.
And let's see if this works here. Are you seeing the screen okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Looks good.
Thank you. Let's see how I can advance here. Okay. Just a reminder that our website is n6na.org, and that's a little capture of the screen, and again a reminder about renewing your membership, and we have a link right there on our homepage for that, and a picture of our guest speaker here tonight. And also a reminder that we're looking for nominations for the Lila Frank Award for exceptional service. Has to be a River City ARCS member, and we'd like to get those votes by mail, so contact at n6na.org. That's our presentation in our December meeting. We might have to do that virtually. Also, we're looking for nominations for board members, 2 board members, and also all 4 officers. And that because November is our election month for our meeting. Reminder also that our nets will be tomorrow night. We have a daily health and welfare net on our N6NA repeater 145.25. And then tomorrow night, of course, we have all our regular club nets. 8 o'clock will be the regular 2-meter net. 8:30 p.m. will be our 10-meter net, 28.420 megahertz upper sideband. And then at 9 p.m. we're having a slow scan net, and we're going to be sharing pictures that we've captured from the International Space Station. From what I understand, they're going to be broadcasting pictures from it as they pass over up until October 8th. So you still have a chance to catch those on your 2-meter rig. They're broadcasting on 145.80 FM, and they come in full scale, full quieting. They've got a really strong signal when they do pass over. Reminder under website activity here for the month of September, got a increase from August to September. We had 1,762 page views to our website. And most of the views were, of course, September 2nd, which was the day after our meeting. People like to go and play the YouTube video of the meeting that we post up there the day after. The most active web pages were the home page, 441 page views, 10 meter page, 296. And then our magnetic loop antenna project page, which was 168. And most of our hits come through Google, referred by Google, 50.9%. Direct to our URL, n6na.org, was 30.1%. And the rest were referred from other services like Bing and DuckDuckGo. And again, we have visitors from all over the world. Most of our visitors do come from California, over 1,000 last month, and Texas had a few, in Florida, and then the rest of the world. Social media is quite active. Our YouTube channel last month had 1,016 views. We have 249 subscribers on our YouTube channel. Facebook page has 412 followers, Twitter page 136. Actually, those are followers, it should be. And then N6NA Discord server, we have 14 members. And there's links to all of these social media feeds on our homepage. And again, if you have any information that you want to get to us into the website, send an email to contact@n6na.org. And that's the end. And I'll release this here. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Carol. Thanks for the update. Do we have any other board member updates or any other news items tonight before we move to our main topic?
Thank you.
Nothing. All right. Okay. All right. Well, we'll hand over to Joe then for our main topic tonight.
All right, Kevin, thank you very much. And you might have to do something to make sure that I can do my share. Sometimes that doesn't always work unless somebody enables me.
I think you should be good. Yeah.
All right. Okay. So let's see here. We'll see if we can get rid of my ugly face here. And put this screen up. We're going to do this. And let's see. All right. Is that working okay?
Yeah, looks good.
Amen.
All right, good, good. And just so you guys know, I'm on fiber, so I should not be pixelating at all or anything. I have 1 gigabit up and 1 gigabit down. The fiber does not come to my neighborhood. It literally goes into my kitchen. So that's where my ONT is. So I am 100% gigabit up and down. All right, a little bit about who I am. I was first licensed in 1969, so I'm celebrating 51 years as a licensed ham. My Elmer was Leo Meyerson, W0, Get Fat Quick. Any of you guys know what he was famous for?
World Radio Labs, yeah.
That's right, World Radio Laboratories, home of Globe and Galaxy radios and kits. Was in Council Bluffs, and he lived in Omaha. He was my Elmer. He was a friend of the family and taught me what I knew at the very beginning. I'm originally from Omaha, but I live in Lincoln. I don't work in Omaha daily anymore. I should change this slide because I'm mostly retired, so I only go to Omaha maybe once a week. My work for most years has been an IT field tech, which means I go out and fix people's busted printers, networks, and servers. I write the monthly kit building column in CQ magazine and have done so since November of 2009. So
my computer froze up. Get out of the way, dog.
So okay, so anyways, I've been writing for CQ since November of 2009. So I have been doing CQ for finishing my 11th year and beginning my 12th year already with the column I'm working on now. I'm also the contributing author for the ARL handbook for the construction techniques chapter since the 2014 edition. So that new ARL handbook that's coming out, you'll see the summary includes an update on soldering tools. I did that part. I do take a lot of photos, enter my best photos every year in the state fair, but we didn't have that this year. Made my first trip to Dayton in '75 and photographed that. Once again, didn't make that this year, but I've spoken there 30 times. And I take all my pictures and make a slideshow set to music every year, all about handvention and my experience. So let's talk about the kit suppliers, who's in and who's out. And by the way, if you guys don't know, I am in Lincoln, Nebraska. So right in the middle of the country. Number one on the list is QRPkits.com. They have a whole bunch of stuff out there. I use one of their kits as a group kit building experience. QRPguys.com has come out with a whole bunch of really innovative new kits, and I will show a few of those. 4-State QRP Group, 4SQRP, has some absolutely incredible kits and not high cost either. And a lot of them use circuit board material for the cases. Velleman kits are available through Jameco or Fry's. Well, I don't know if Fry's still around. Elenco kits, also you can order online, as well as Elecraft. Elecraft kits probably have some of the best documentation of any kit out there. One of the nicest instruction books you'll see. DZ kit is the same way, but they only have a couple of kits, including the Sienna transceiver, which is an excellent radio, and you don't have to do the surface mount, just like Elecraft. MFJ has a lot of kits, including an antenna tuner. Nightfire Kits at vakits.com comes from Florida, and they have a lot of kits that are under $10. Really good way to get started. QRPME.com, that is Rex in Maine, and he does the Rockmite and the Tuna Tin kits. There's lots of Chinese suppliers. We'll mention those later. Heathkit is supposedly in Silicon Valley, but we don't know what they're doing right now. They do sell a couple of parts and sub-assemblies for a small number of the old traditional Heath kits, as well as a couple of kits, but I have not had one sent to me yet to build and write about. Don't know what they're doing right now. And there's a lot of clubs, especially QRP clubs, that are making kits also. So of course the original Heath kit is gone, Ramsey Electronics is gone, and Tentec is out of the kit business as well. So before you begin putting your kit together, you really want to make a list of the things you need to use or test your kit once you've got it all put together. One thing that every kit builder has to have, and that's a multimeter. And there's really no excuse. If you're on a limited budget, you can go to Harbor Freight and get one for $6 or sometimes even free with a coupon. It's not going to be a fluke, but it actually works quite well. And I know a lot of guys that have built just a huge number of kits using one of those meters. An oscilloscope, that's always a good idea. They are getting cheaper in flea markets. A reference receiver, the worst thing in the world is to build a kit and turn it on, and if it's a receiver and you hook it to an outside antenna and you hear nothing, well, you don't know if the band is good or bad. So you got to have a reference receiver that you can plug into the same antenna and let yourself know if the band is really open or not. Because I did a 40-meter transceiver kit and I hooked it up and I just didn't hear a peep, and I thought, oh, something's not right. And then I hooked the kit to a signal generator, and the signal generator worked with the reference receiver and it worked with the kit, but nothing got anything from the antenna. So we figured out that the band was dead. Do you need a headset or a speaker? A lot of kits don't have those built in. A key or a paddle. Some kits require you to have a paddle to program them at the beginning. Dummy load and or tuned antenna. We kind of mentioned that a little bit ago. A dummy load is essential because most QRP kits have no VSWR protection. And so if it's a dead short or it's open, you could blow that output transistor before you ever get a chance to put it on the air. So make sure when you first turn on a kit, you want to hook it into a dummy load first to make sure that you're not key down and into open or shorted load. Do you have a 12-volt power supply or AC power available? Yes, there are some tube type kits out there. Does it use a 9-volt battery, AA, AAAs? What do you need to make that thing work? Especially for kits that are stage by stage, because they start with the power supply first. So you want to make sure you have some source of power or batteries, whatever the kit needs. Tuning tools. Tuning tools are generally made from plastic or non-conductive materials. And that is so that you do not influence the tuning of that circuit. So make sure you have the right plastic tuning tools also before you put your kit together. Some kits actually come with the ones that you need, but most do not. ESD, electrostatic discharge. That's especially a problem here where I live, because in the wintertime when it goes down to 0 degrees and you heat that air up to 70 degrees in the house, your humidity level is going to be very low and you kazap just about anything. So make sure that you know all about ESD. I could probably do a whole seminar on that topic because I had to learn it for work. The work surface should be smooth and it should be covered so that you protect it. Even a wooden bench, you're going to want to put something over it to keep it from burning. So what I do is I usually use a cookie sheet, and you can get them for $1 at Dollar Tree or places like that. I use a set you can get at Walmart that are like 3 for $6. Comes with 3 different sizes, and it lets the parts stay where they are, and it lets you ground it in case you want to ground it for ESD. And the cookie sheet keeps your blobs of solder and little bits of wire that you cut and so forth in one place, so that at the end you can shake the thing into a trash can. A board holder, it depends on the size of board or what the kit is. Some kits you might want to have a PC board holder that you can flip around. The manual, a lot of kits do not come with a printed manual. They come with a web link for a PDF or Word doc file. So I recommend to people, if they have a color printer, to print it in color. I do that at work, especially when I'm working on color printers, because the boss insists on a 40 sheet test. So it's always a good time to print a kit manual, full duplex. I do not recommend anymore using a laptop to display your kit manual, because all those little pieces of metal go flying when you're trimming your parts on the circuit board, and they could end up in that keyboard and short out your laptop. Then I get to take your hard drive out and find you a new laptop. So I recommend a tablet. Your iPads, your Android tablets work just fine, and you can pinch in or stretch out so you can magnify things. So you don't need a magnifying glass. You can just blow it up and see the details in the photos and read the fine print. So a tablet works great, because those little pieces of metal, when you snip them, they just hit that front glass. There's no opening really, especially if it's in a nice case. Some neat things to have on hand. I highly recommend pre-sorted standardized parts. You can buy these assortments online. You can get groups of common values of resistors, capacitors, diodes, and so forth. They're great to have. Keep them sorted out. Sometimes they come in their own pre-sorted parts cabinets. Others come in little bags, and you put them in your own little trays in your parts cabinet. And they're great to have, because when you're building a kit, and let's say it's missing a 10K resistor, well, you can write the manufacturer or call them and say, hey, I need this 10K resistor, but by the time it gets to you, you're probably not in the mood to keep building. And there's no Radio Shack store nearby, and there's a lot fewer surplus stores. So I keep these on hand. The other thing is there's always future modifications or revisions in the circuit on some of these kits. And it's always good to have standard parts available, so you can say, hey, C39 is better at 10 picofarad than 5 picofarad or something like that. They may find out that because of a change in a transistor or something, that they forget that certain components may need to be changed. And so having the spare parts and the variety of parts. If you see something online that says change this and you get this extra function or this modification, well, it's good to have those extra parts. 9-volt battery snaps and battery holders are quite worthwhile to have, as well as plugs and jacks, like your 1/4 inch, 1/8 inch, 2 or 3 conductor plugs and jacks, RCA phono plugs and jacks, PL259s and BNC and SMA and so forth. It's always good to see what that kit takes in and out and what you need to do to be able to input signals and put them out and make connections to your antennas, because some kits may have a BNC connector as the output and you've got a PL259. So you got to make sure you have the right adapter. 12-volt coaxial power plugs and jacks are good to have. Make sure you see if it needs a 2.1 millimeter or 2.5 millimeter and if the center pin is actually positive. Very few kits are not using the 2.1 and the center pin positive. That's kind of been the standard, but there's some that come from overseas that do vary. So make sure you look at the instructions and see if you need a coaxial power plug to come off your power supply and plug into the kit, and what the polarization is supposed to be. That's one thing we don't want to do, and that is to blow up the kit on its first power up. Solder wick or desoldering aids, of course we all make mistakes when we're doing it, so I suggest having some good quality solder wick, solder suckers, vacuum desoldering tools, things like that, and an emery board on hand for enameled wire. We'll talk about that later. We'll talk a little bit about the soldering irons and soldering stations. You don't have to spend a lot to get a good soldering iron. I look for a handle that fits my hands comfortably. The wattage doesn't seem to matter as much anymore on soldering stations like this. Make sure that it accepts a wide variety of tips, so you're not always using a clunky big one or a real tiny one where you need something larger. So make sure that they have other size tips available. Some of these actually come with a variety of tips. ESD safe, what you want to do is look to see if it has a 3-prong plug for power. That way you know that what's on the soldering tip is grounded as opposed to just being an AC source, which can cause problems with CMOS parts. You want to make sure it has a place to put the iron when you're done, so you're not putting it on the table or an ashtray or something like that. And it has a place to clean it. This particular one has 2 cleaners. It has a sponge and it has a brass thing right there underneath the holder, and it's got some flux in it and stuff, great for cleaning the tip. You want to be able to vary the temperature, and just having it variable isn't good enough. I really prefer if you have one that actually keeps the temperature. This one shows it in Fahrenheit or Celsius, and it keeps it within plus or minus 2 degrees Celsius, which is pretty much the standard for commercial electronic production. This particular iron sells for around $60, and this is the website, xtronicusa.com, and coincidentally, this one is distributed from a place right here in Lincoln, Nebraska. On the left, you see it also comes with a solder roll holder, which really helps to keep the solder from becoming a cat toy or rolling off the table. Some other nice things to have. You want to have a variable voltage power supply that's metered, both volts and amps, because if you're working on a little QRP Pixie transceiver and it's drawing 4 amps, chances are something's getting really warm really quick. So you want to make sure that you know how much current your kit is drawing. Now, some of them use current draw measurement to test to see if it's okay or not. And the meters on a power supply are not precise enough, so you're going to use your multimeter for that. A frequency counter is helpful. Want to know what your VFO, BFO, local oscillator, things like that are. It's good to have a frequency counter. We mentioned oscilloscopes, very, very useful tool. You can even get them as a kit. We mentioned dummy loads, and the vacuum desoldering station is simply a hollow tip soldering iron, and that has a vacuum in it, and it sucks up the solder like right through the hole of the circuit board. So when you're done, it's all cleaned out. All you do is lift the part right out. If you build as many kits as I do, that's kind of a must. We mentioned having a reference receiver. You can use a general coverage receiver. It's great for entertainment, testing, checking the band and so forth, or even an AM/FM clock radio. Gives you some entertainment and time reminders. The only caution I have is, especially this time of this year, don't listen to talk radio, because no matter if you're on this side of the aisle or that side of the aisle, they're pretty much designed to tick you off and get you all upset and worried. So I listen to my favorite classic rock radio station while I'm building my kits and not worry about the political world. Random wire antennas are great for testing receivers. A string of wire across the ceiling or out the window or something, that always is great if you're just building a receiver. The solder station you saw before has that solder roll holder. Now, this is my doctor's prescription for the correct solder to use. I use 6337, 031 or 025 thickness, rosin core, no clean. That makes the best appearance. 6337 does act differently than 6040. I have a customer who is a professional electronics factory, and they use this exact same kind of solder. And the reason is, especially for hand soldering, is because 6337 has great wetting characteristics. And what that means is it flows and it adheres a lot quicker and a lot nicer. And it goes right through that hole in the circuit board and fills that in real nice instead of just making a cap on top. It melts only a couple of degrees cooler than the 6040, but when it cools, it does not get frosty or corroded looking, which you can often get with a 6040 if things move while you're letting it cool down. 6337 has a very short plastic state, and so you get a lot less cold solder joints if you're using 6337 solder. I try to keep my kits stored away securely in between sessions to keep them secure, and that's because this is the enemy of all kit builders. That is Tesla on the left and Newton on the right. And neither one is behind me now on my chair. But you don't want them to get into your parts. So this is one thing that I've found that works real well. You can order these online. You can find them at Cabela's or Bass Pro, places like that. It is a 4-tray tackle box. Now you can also find this at a place like Michael's, except it's pink and lavender and used for jewelry. And you can get it at Menards, but it might be yellow and black. But it's the same darn thing if it says Plano 1354. The top has a lot of space for your larger parts, partially completed circuit boards, things like that. And then the 4 trays slide out, and each one has changeable dividers in it. So you can make each pocket in there different sizes so that you can get all your parts sorted out. And this is how we sort them out. This is what the tray looks like from one of those. Sometimes I use a cupcake tray, which works fine, and you can ground those for ESD. And I use that usually when I'm going to sit down and it's a short kit and I can put it together in a half an hour. Cupcake tray is my go-to. But if I'm going to be building for a longer period of time, I'm going to want to have something like this, because in between groups of parts or something, I can close that and latch it. And you don't even have to latch both latches. Just make sure it stays closed. So if it falls off the table or cat jumps up or something like that, it's going to remain sealed. Now what I do is I sort the most often used parts closest to me. So you can see in this lower left compartment I have the resistors, because those are usually the most common parts. Then we go to the different kinds of capacitors, and then diodes and transistors and pre-made chokes, things like that. And then I have the toroids and the wire for that. And then I have the knobs, plugs, jacks, connectors, screws, and nuts. The things that I'm going to use either first or last are in the back. Everything else, like I said, the ones I grab most often are the closest to me, so I don't have to reach over and accidentally bump some of the other parts. Now, some kits are stage by stage, and so they're sorted in this particular kit by the stage number or step number. So you might find that they have larger parts. So I just take out some of the dividers so that I have a larger compartment for that one. You'll notice that some of these only have a couple of parts in it. Some have a dozen or so, like this stage and so forth. And I put little pieces of paper with numbers on it at the bottom of each of these little cups. So it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and so on. So I kind of work my way back and forth through this thing. And when you're done with each stage, you should have the cup empty. Stage by stage kits are usually the more complex ones. The older Ramsey kits had that. The Elecraft kits like the K2 and so forth are stage by stage. They usually start from the power supply onward. The reason for that is if you've got a problem with power supply, it's going to be tough to find that if you've got 300 components installed on the board. So we start from the power supply, and then we hook it up to its power source or put the batteries in or whatever, and we turn it on according to the instructions, and we test it out, and we see if there's like 3.3 volts there, 5 volts there, 12 volts there, and so forth. This is how we know that we're getting a good start on our kit. If all the voltages are correct at the test points they tell you, then it's time to go on. Each stage is tested so that if it doesn't work, you've only put, let's say, 8 or 9 parts in there, so it's much easier to isolate the problems. Obviously, you can fix it before it's a lot more buried and difficult to find. That way, you also have more stopping points by having these smaller numbers of parts installed at one given time. You can stop, close your box, walk away. You know you've tested that stage. Your kit works so far where it is, so you feel a good feeling of accomplishment and you're ready to go for the next stage when you're ready to come back. Once again, I put the parts for each stage in its own container so that when we're done, there should be no more parts left in that container. Once again, you got to have the proper test equipment needed. Let's say that stage is the audio amplifier. You might have to hook up a speaker or a headphone. You might have to touch your finger to a spot on the board to see if there's a buzz or a change in noise, and that's how they tell that the circuit is working. A lot of kits have no sequence at all. So my kind of rule of thumb is I start with all the resistors first, then the capacitors, then the diodes and transistors, and kind of work our way up the hierarchy of electronic parts, with the last being the ICs and then the less common parts like your chokes, toroids, and things like that. You might want to check the documentation for the kit, because even if it has no step-by-step instructions, they almost always have special instructions on how to insert certain parts. Maybe one part blocks another part, so you got to do it first, things like that. So make sure you check the documentation. And once again, be sure that the supply of each type of part is exhausted as you go through the steps. However, there can be an exception to that, and that is some kits come with extra capacitors, resistors, or so on for different options. It could be that the kit works on multiple bands, and let's say you're making 20 meters instead of 40, so you got to use the parts that it calls for the 20-meter version. So what do you do with the parts that they might have for the 40-meter version or something? You get to sort those out at the end and put those in your spare parts, so you have more extra parts for future kits. So some kits do come with some extra parts for different options. The trouble with toroids, this is kind of a bugaboo that a lot of people have trouble with, but it's really not that hard. I always tell people follow the directions very, very carefully, because the people that design these kits know what they're doing. If you look at this toroid on the right, this is actually a transformer because you can see the primary and the secondary right here. You have 2 turns of the yellow wire and you have a whole bunch of turns of this green enameled wire. Now, the way we count the turns is we count the number of passes it makes on the inside of the donut. So once again, you have 2 of them on this, and you got to count them like this on the inside of the donut. Now, this turn here counts as 1 because it goes through the inside, and so does this. Even though it doesn't tuck underneath, it still makes it most of the way around, and so that's how they count it. Getting the insulation off, if it's thermalese wire, your kit will probably tell you. And what I do is I heat up the soldering iron up all the way. I turn up the heat, and then I put a real good sized blob of solder on the tip of the iron, and then I bring that blob up next to the toroid, and I start melting that insulation off. Now that's going to make some kind of irritating smoke, so if you've got a little computer fan, that helps a lot. And what you do is you let it sit there and it melts that insulation off. And then after it does, you slowly pull it down the wire away from the toroid. And so what it does is it removes the insulation, and what else does it do? It tins the wire. As you can see here, it's tinned and ready to go, which makes it a lot better and a lot more chances of getting a good connection when you solder it to the circuit board. Toroids do cause a lot of problems because people don't do them right. Best I can tell you is don't nick the wires. Be really careful. Wind them pretty tight so that they fit real nice against the core. And make sure you use the right core. Sometimes some kits have different colors or different stripes on them. And so you want to make sure you follow the directions. Now, some guys do all the toroids first, and then they put a little sticker on it that says L1 or T2 or something like that. And they put those in those little cups in their parts as well. So they spend their first session building the kit doing nothing but winding the toroids. And then when the instruction calls for that toroid, they pull it out, they find, oh, this is L3. And they put it where L3 goes on the circuit board. So just like a transistor, resistor, or anything else. So that's the advantage of winding the toroids in advance. We'll talk a little bit about mistakes that you can make. Some of the RF chokes look almost exactly like a resistor. Usually the ends are a little thicker and the wires are slightly thinner than your regular resistors, so kind of pay attention. They also do have stripes like a resistor, so you're going to want to check your parts list and your instructions to make sure you're taking the right part. Some of them are even printed numbers on them. You want to double check your electrolytic and tantalum capacitors to make sure you have the right value and polarization. If you put them on backwards, they can become firecrackers. I use a magnifier to check your 1/8 watt resistors, and use a meter or a component tester if necessary to be sure. And I'll talk about component testers and why they've become a very inexpensive and very vital tool for kit builders. Watch your markings on the diodes. There's either a beveled edge on some plastic ones or a white or black stripe on it. So make sure that that is in correctly as well, because one diode in wrong means your kit doesn't work. Bend your leads very carefully on all parts. The ones that are really especially fragile are those little tiny glass diodes, those little bitty RF chokes, and the really tiny little capacitors. They're very, very vulnerable. So what you want to do is be very careful if you have to bend the leads to make it fit. This is a component tester kit. It sells for around $12, and that's the address we get it from. You'll notice it's marked as a transistor tester, but it does a lot more than that. We're going to do the Ronco commercial. It slices, dices, purees, and blends. And what it does is it takes the part, and there are 3 leads that come off of this thing. 1, 2, and 3 you can see on the circuit board down here on the lower left. And what I do is I take the kit does not come with them, so what I do is I take clip leads that you can buy like 10 for a buck or whatever, and I cut them in half. And then I take 3 different colors of clip leads and I strip the wire end. And then I tin that, and then I put it in one of those terminals. So it might be red, green, blue or something. Any kind of 3-color combination is fine as long as there's no two the same. And then what it does is when you connect a part, like if you connected a capacitor to 1 and 2, it's going to tell you there's a capacitor between 1 and 2 and what the value is. And if it's an electrolytic, it's going to even tell you if it's a good one or not. This particular kit, you'll notice on the right, allows you to supply 5.5 to 12 volts on the input. But most commonly, if you put it in a case, it's going to run on a 9-volt battery. This one has a simple 2-line LCD, and we're going to show you one that's a little more sophisticated than that. But this is a kit, as you can see. I have done group kit builds with people building these, and they've been relatively successful. And they get to take home something that not only tells you what a resistor, capacitor, or a diode and which leads it's on and which is which, like it'll tell you the cathode or anode on a diode. It will tell you if it's an NPN, PNP, or MOSFET, and gives you the collector base emitter or drain gate and source. It'll tell you if it's a thyristor, an SCR, back-to-back diodes, a Darlington pair. It will tell you what all these things are and what their values are. And it doesn't matter which lead is connected to which lead, it will tell you which thing is on which number wire. So we'll look at another one that's a little more clear. This one uses a more of a dot matrix screen. This one, I have a little NPN transistor in it, and it tells me that pin 3 is the collector, pin 2 is the base, and pin 1 is the emitter. It's giving me the gain, the HFE, and the forward voltage drop. So tells you a lot of information about that darn little transistor that I didn't know about it before. The only thing is that this is a ZIF socket, and so you have to be able to plug your part into there. But what you can do is, once again, you can do that clip lead thing. You can take 3 different color clip leads, and I take the end of that wire and I strip it, and then I tin it nice and thick, and then I slip it into those holes so that you clamp down with the lever, and now you've got 3 clip leads that come out, and you can test parts without having to plug them into the ZIF socket. This one is a kit, but it's not. You don't have to solder anything. All you got to do is do the Chinese puzzle of putting together the clear plastic case. And it actually, the longest part of the process is peeling off that darn protective coating. And then you can kind of look at it and figure out where things go and put it together. And you can have this kit running in about 10 minutes. Not very expensive either. I think they sell for like $18 to $20 for one of these. And it does the same thing that the other one does. This is an AM broadcast receiver that's based on the old Boys Life Boys radios from the early 1960s, the early transistor radios. The printed circuit board material not only makes up the circuit board, it makes up the case as well. The front panel is where all the parts are soldered to, but you don't see any leads coming through because all the leads solder to pads that are very clearly marked on the other side. So if you have a first-time kit builder, this is absolutely great because they're not going to be soldering through little holes and stuff like that. All they got to do is bend the leads and put the part over the pads. Now what I do is sometimes I will put a blob of solder on one of the pads involved in that part, and then I'll kind of bend the lead in kind of a U shape while keeping the other leads bent so that they fit the 2 or 3 or whatever number of pads that you need for that part. And then what you do is I just heat that up and put that down on that pad. Then I take the soldering iron and solder the other pads, and then I trim the extra part of the wire that's sticking up, and it's there. Now, if you do this wrong and you got a first-time kit builder, you don't want to be fumbling around with solder wick. So all you do on this particular kit is you take the soldering iron and heat up the pad, tuck it underneath, and lift the wire. So you can desolder in a matter of a second or two. This one, like I said, has everything printed on the board and makes a great little AM radio. I really have enjoyed this kit, and actually sounds really good. It's actually a regenerative receiver, but you don't need a regen control. This is one that I've used most often. And by the way, the last one comes from State QRP group, forestqrp.com. And the design engineer for that Morania is NM0S, David Kripe, who is a senior level RF design engineer for Collins Aerospace in Cedar Rapids, which is Collins Radio, the actual Collins Radio. So some of these kits are designed by a Collins Radio engineer. This particular one is not. This one comes from QRPkits.com. And the reason I like to use this as a first kit is because you can use it to power all your other kits. Now what it does is it takes AC or DC input, and it can be either all the way up to a 30 volt AC transformer all the way down to like 12 volts DC or whatever coming in. What I use is a old laptop power supply, because I have lots of those at work, because every time we decommission a laptop for somebody, I have the guys toss it into a box in the garage. Right now, it has so many in it that I probably get a hernia lifting the thing. So I grab a few at a time and I take them home and put them in a box in my garage. And then when I go out and do a group kit build, what I do is I cut the plug off the end of the wire, and I strip the two leads and I tin them so that the end user can just put them into those two pins. Now, of course, the input, because it allows AC or DC, because it has a bridge rectifier right here, it can be polarized either way coming in. It has an LED on the left side that tells you there's input. You have the filter capacitors, and then you have a regulator circuit, and then you have a little pot here. This is a little 5K PC board mount pot. And the biggest complaint I've gotten is that's kind of tricky to adjust. So what I tell people is, well, you can just desolder that, and then you can solder 3 wires and get a panel mount 5K pot, and away you go. This is an LM317 regulator with a laptop supply that's getting like 19.6 volts into it. I get about 17 down to 1.5 volts at 1.5 amps max out of this kit. So with 1.5 amps at 12 volts, you can still do a 10-watt radio. So it actually powers quite a bit. Of course, your DC output is polarized, and there's another LED here to let you know that there's power coming out. I know guys that buy those little 3-digit Chinese panel meters that are self-powered, and they hook those also across the DC output so that you can get a more precise reading on what voltage you're putting out. There's lots of holes in this thing, lots of different ways to configure it. You can put it in a box or whatever, and it makes an absolutely great first-time kit build project. This is another kit that's relatively easy to put together. This is the 30-meter Cricket. It's put out by the State QRP group, and it's another NM0S kit. A lot of people say, well, it looks kind of like the Pixie, and they're usually disappointed in the receiver characteristics of one of those things because they're really broad and they're not very sensitive. But this one is. This one is very sensitive, and I was listening with the right crystal, because it is fixed frequency. I was listening to the WWV bulletin feed on the 80-meter version of this, and then I plugged in my KX2 Elecraft into the same antenna, and lo and behold, it was only about an S1 or S2 signal, and it was just perfectly clear and easy to copy on this thing. So this is a really good, fun kit to put together. You'll notice that you don't have to wind toroids, and the reason is Dave did the math, and he figured out how to make a spiral wound inductor onto the circuit board. So you can see there's no leads anywhere near it, because this is an inductor. So you don't need to wind toroids and install coils on the board. They are already done for you. And you can put a socket on the board and plug in different crystals for the same band. It has no volume control. The newer version has an on-off switch. It runs on a standard 9-volt transistor battery, and it puts out a whopping 1 full watt of RF on CW. And before you laugh at that, I've been able to see my signal being copied on the reverse beacon network all over the country, just testing it out, calling CQ. And the key is part of the kit. So it's all kind of a self-contained transceiver. You plug the headset in there and away you go. This is another 4-state kit. This is the first voice type kit, phone mode. It is a 75-meter AM transceiver. And so you have a mic gain, volume, and tuning control. It is digitally synthesized. This is a hybrid kit. And I'm going to mention that there are several hybrid kits out there right now. What I mean by hybrid is it has both surface mount and through-hole components, and all the surface mount stuff is already done for you. And as you can see, if you look at the material that makes up this case, once again, it is made out of PC board material. So it makes a very strong and double shielded case. This is kind of the specs of this thing. It does have general coverage, shortwave broadcast receiving, and I actually get about 10 or 15 watts PEP out of mine. Inside the ham band, it moves in 1 kilohertz steps. Outside the ham band, it moves in 5 kilohertz steps because that's what shortwave broadcast is. And so I'm able to listen to shortwave broadcast stations on this, as well as listen and talk to the people who are sitting there around 3890 or so at night talking on 75-meter AM. There is a Class G modulator in that, so it does not have a transformer. So that really lowers the cost. It's an absolute wonderful little kit. This is kind of a quick look inside, and you will see there are lots of surface mount parts in there. And guess what? You don't have to do a single one of those. The through-hole parts like these capacitors, the transistors, and so forth, and the switches, and the filters, receiver IF filters, and so forth, all these things do get soldered in. There are about 120 some surface mount parts in this kit. You don't have to do any of them, and there's only about 30 parts that you have to solder. So once again, there are toroids to wind. They're kind of hidden behind this output transistor. And I think there's like 4 of them. And these are simple toroids. They are not transformers. They're not bifilar or trifilar, so they're very simple to do. And they do supply the good kind of wire with it. The enclosure has holes so that the heat can vent out. And this is what the back of the kit looks like. You can see the power jack and so forth. Oops. There we go. And mine actually is serial number 0001. Some final tips. I asked people to kind of remove the distractions, let your voicemail pick up the calls. RTFM in the IT business stands for read the fine manual. Everybody thinks I'm going to say the other word, which it also means. Use that cookie sheet so stuff doesn't get away, especially surface mount parts, and protect your surface. Make sure you have your batteries and power supply, plugs, jacks, cables. What do you need to make that kit work and talk to the outside world? Keep those standard spare parts ready. Keep your soldering iron tip clean. Use adequate lighting and magnification. Do not use incandescent. I recommend LED or fluorescent. No warm white. I prefer the bright white light on either the LED or fluorescent. Take your time and enjoy the fun, because kit building is always meant to be fun. The best satisfaction is making a QSO on something you built yourself. So with that, we'll say 73s, but we're going to take a look at, and that's, by the way, that's what I look like when I'm doing sweepstakes and catching the pileups of people that need Nebraska. So let me see here if I can get my camera back, and let's see if this lets me get my screen back. And there we go. I have my screen back, and I think you've got my camera again. So I'm going to show a couple of things. This kit is featured in the October CQ magazine that's just come out. This is a code practice oscillator from a club in Georgia. This kit sells for 10 parts and has like 10 parts to solder. 10 bucks, 10 parts. And it fits in an Altoids tin. And I even drilled a hole in the side for the jack so you can plug an outside key in. If I turn it on, let me see if I can make this work. And there we go. And it flashes an LED and it beeps, and it has a touch button in there. And you can do a regular key as well. And it fits in a regular Altoids tin. This is a QRP Guys double sideband FT8 or digital modes transceiver. The case did not come with it. I printed the case with my 3D printer, and they had the recipe for it online. From what I'm told, this kit is now discontinued and the new one has come out, and there is no 3D case yet for it, but will be coming shortly. This is something that's not a kit, but I used the 3D printer to make a case. This is a nano VNA, and I 3D printed a case, and if I push on the bottom, it opens a door, and you can see that the terminators are inside the little compartment in there, which is pretty sweet. So I can have that all ready to go in one little case. This is another kit. This is a hybrid kit also. This is called the Morcerino. This comes from Austria. It sells for $99 to $100 roughly. It depends on what the exchange rate is nowadays. It comes from Austria, so right now it's going to take between 1 and 3 weeks or more for you to get this in the mail. It has an OLED display over here, kind of small. It is a code practice kit that is probably the most sophisticated you've ever seen. You can use the paddles on there to do CW. You can plug in a straight key. You can plug in external paddles, and it will read your code. It will read the code that you're sending, so you can practice. You can plug a straight key in and practice forming your letters. It will send to you random CW abbreviations, random call signs, random phrases, random words. It also has 2 different ways, including Wi-Fi built in. That's what the antenna is for. And the Wi-Fi is so that you can communicate with another one of these devices that's either on your network or anywheres in the world on the internet, as long as you know its IP address on somebody's system. So it's absolutely fascinating. I have played with this, and I've even had a QSO through the network, and it's a lot of fun. This is another FT8 kit, digital modes. This also has a PC board case designed by one of the guys that does it for the Forest QRP group, but it's made by Midnight Design Solutions. Now we'll take a look here. This is not a kit you're going to put together in one evening. You're going to spend a little more time with this guy. And you see those dreaded surface mount parts on there. Once again, the handful of surface mount parts on this board are already done for you. And you get this nice case. That's what the front panel looks like. You push the different buttons to choose the 2 different fixed frequencies. It is digitally synthesized. And the left one is FT8 frequency, and the right one I have set for FT4. I have a friend who set his up for the Olivia frequency. Another guy set it up for RTTY, and you can do all those. You can see the audio in and out, your power in, your RF out, and your power switch on the back. So it's kind of a fun kit, and I've made lots of contacts with it. And like I said, you're free to reprogram the second frequency on the Alt button on the right. So I think I have done everything. Oh, this is another case for another kit. This is for a device called a TV Be Gone. And this is great if you're in a McDonald's and the people are yelling at the TV or something. You can go boom, and all the TVs go off. It's just a powerful infrared remote control, and I 3D printed a case for it. All right, any questions? And I don't know how you handle your muting and stuff, so and I don't have your chat open yet. So,
Well, everyone's muted right now, but you can unmute yourself if you've got a question for Joe.
So, did you get started in ham radio by actually building your own transmitters and receivers, or did you start out with commercially made products?
both actually. I had when I was about 7 years old, my dad took me to World Radio Labs because Leo Meyerson was a good friend, and he suggested a simple receiver, which was the Hallicrafters S120. Wasn't the best receiver in the world, but it definitely got my feet wet listening to hams and international shortwave. But then we also brought home one of these 101 type project kits where you use the spring clips and you put the parts on different terminals. And so rather than soldering at that early age, I was clipping parts to terminals and making little gadgets and stuff that the kid had in the instruction book. And then as I got older, then I learned how to solder and started building kits. So I learned how the components worked by using one of those clip-on type kits to make simple things like a water alarm and a simple AM radio or simple AM transmitter and things like that, and burglar alarm and whatever the other circuits were. And so that's really how I got started.
So you grew up with your hands full soldering with parts.
Yes, yes.
It kind of puts me in mind of my older son. They had to bring something to school in kindergarten for their 100th day, and he took in a circuit board that it was stuffed with 100 resistors.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good.
I have a question as well. My first kits were from Radio Shack. They were part of the 101 Archer kit that you might be describing. My very first kit I soldered was a tube AM radio, which scared me because of the amount of voltage that it was in it. And I've been traumatized about anything that uses tubes since. Do you remember what your first kit was?
That's a good question. The first ones I started soldering were about the time I was about 11 or 12. And they were the Radio Shack P-Box kits. So it wasn't a circuit board. It was the ones where you poked the leads through different holes on the board, and then you twisted the wires together underneath and you soldered them and then trimmed them. So I can't remember. I think it was a simple AM radio and a shortwave receiver kit that I did was my first P-Box kits. Those were those ones with the red plastic boxes that the plastic half melted every time you soldered, because back then we didn't have little soldering irons. I had a 75-watt Weller gun, so you had to do it real quick. But that's how I started. And then as I got more into high school, I started assembling PC board type kits, including a 10-watt amplifier for my 2-meter handheld.
Thanks. Great. I remember electronic kits in high school, electronic classes in high school. I'm not sure they still do those. I think mine was kind of a project of making a speaker case. So it became a wood project and a speaker and tweeter, and then use that AM radio with the big giant speaker and just to augment it. So that was my additions to the original kit.
Yeah, a lot of people, that's the fun of kit building, is because you can modify it. You know what's in it. And just for you guys, I wore this shirt tonight. I don't know if you can see it. Oops. Hey, in and out.
In and out. All right.
Hey, my kind of shirt.
Yeah, now you see, the only time I get to them is, the only time I get there is if I go to like Arizona or Las Vegas or LA. And so when I was in Burbank in December, I had to get a shirt and had to stop at least 2 or 3 times at In and Out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But just for you guys, I wore my In and Out tonight.
Thanks. And speaking of your 3D printing, this is a call sign that Joe did on his 3D printer, and I think it was pretty nicely done. My first kit that I ever built was actually a Heathkit transistor tester, and it was back in the 1970s, and everything was point-to-point wiring with terminal strips. The next thing I built after that was a night kit DC to 5 megahertz oscilloscope. And then the big thing was the Heathkit HW101 transceiver, which was my first single sideband transceiver. That had a little bit of point-to-point wiring, but that one was the first one that actually had printed circuit boards, but had vacuum tubes on the printed circuit board. That was quite an experience. You didn't mention anything about QRP Labs, Joe. The one that's the guy Hans Sommer, who does the QCX transceiver and the ultimate. The ultimate.
Yeah, I should edit my list because those are excellent kits, and I have a couple of them. In fact, I'm 3D printing a case for a QCX 40. You can see here. That's one of the pieces. That's the front panel for that is being printed on my 3D printer. Excellent kits, and they have extremely thorough documentation. There's also another kit out there called the MicroBitX, which comes from India. Those are actually no soldering unless you want to do some customization. I have one of their kits. It sells for about $200, but it comes with the case and everything, and the board is already pre-aligned, and it's got a touch screen, full color touch screen front panel, and you can actually assemble it in about 45 minutes and have a working 10-watt HF single sideband and CW transceiver. And I know a bunch of guys that have taken those and used those for digital modes as well. It's actually very stable in terms of frequency, so it works good on FT8, FT4, Olivia, and all those different modes. But there is no soldering involved in it, but it is a kit. And it also comes with an extra set of cabling so that you can design your own case if you want to change it. And there are guys out there that have third-party smarts for the front panel where you just basically unplug the front panel and plug in theirs. And it's got all sorts of different firmware, and you can make it do all sorts of fancy things. But even as it is, it's really pretty good.
Neat.
Yeah, one thing I have to say about the Elecraft, some of the Elecraft kits, like I got the KX3, no soldering at all. It was pretty much just assembly. All you need was screwdrivers, and the same with the KXPA 500, I mean the KPA 500. It's a 500 watt amplifier, no soldering whatsoever. Those kits, it's basically just assembling.
And now I have a KX1, KX2, and KX3. The KX1 was one of the more difficult kits I put together because the parts are really packed in there. And mine has the auto tuner and everything. And the KX1 is no longer available. The KX2 is not a kit. The KX3, yes, you can put in all the different modules and stuff. And you can put it together in about 3.5 hours. The KX3 with all the goodies in it, but I spent a lot longer because I spent half the time photographing and documenting it for 2 months worth of articles. So the KX3 is fun to put together and good to do as a kit, but you got to make sure that you have their signal generator kit because there's a kind of a fancy tune-up procedure that's automated, and it's fascinating to see it do it. I've done it a couple times, but you get the best performance if you perform that final alignment using their signal generator, which is not a kit, but will plug into this.
Hey, Joe, this is Bob, K6GCN. Great information tonight. You've given me great information on the type of solder to use and those $12 component testers. Much appreciated. But you also mentioned Leo Meyerson as your Elmer. My first transmitter was his company's Globe Chief 90.
Mhm.
And I think, Carol, you mentioned that yours was, your first transmitter was also the Globe Chief 90. Wonder if you have any other comments about Leo Meyerson that you recall?
Well, the Globe Chief was the first one I used in high school because I was still a novice when I got into high school, and used an an SX101A as the receiver with it in high school, and had this giant toggle switch for TR. But the thing about it was, when I got to high school, there were no other novices, and that radio was only half assembled. So I finished assembling it in high school and kept it there. My very first transceiver at home was a Galaxy GT550. And while I was going through my novice classes, which were at the World Radio Labs factory cafeteria in Council Bluffs, Leo would come in from time to time and say hi and so forth. And he took me into the back to show me a brand new radio, because back then they were selling the Galaxy 5 and 5 Mark III and so forth. And he says, "This is the new GT550. This is going to be really good." And so what he did was he took me back there, and we put kind of an X with a magic marker on a chassis. And every week I would come back to my novice code class and stuff, and I would see it as it went farther down the production line until finally it became mine. And that was my HF rig.
Wow.
And I really regret selling it years ago. And somebody in Omaha came to me randomly a couple years ago and walked up to me and handed me a GT550 that was within like 5 or 6 serial numbers of mine. So it was in the same, probably on the same table, going through the process. Leo was great. When I was about 7 or 8 years old, he put me on his lap and we talked to somebody in Visalia, California. And I thought, it's going to be so cool, because I was supposed to speak at the IDXC this year in Visalia. And of course, like everything else, was canceled. Next year, I think, is virtual. So at some point, I definitely want to come for the very first time to Visalia, because that's also where I don't even know who it was, where my first conversation over ham radio was, to Visalia. And I don't know how far that is from you guys, what, about 3 hours or something? But,
yeah, 3-4 hours.
Mhm.
but I do plan on coming to Visalia.
Well, he certainly hit a sweet spot with his transmitters during that time, widely advertised, and between WRL Globe equipment and Heathkit, I think a lot of us novices who really didn't have a lot of money found a way to get on the air. So we owe a debt of gratitude to him.
And in fact, even in the 50s, he was the only ham manufacturer to have a payment plan for his kits, and very unique. And like I said, I really enjoyed going over there, because they would sell parts, they sold commercial radios, they sold their radios, they sold kits, antennas, you name it. It was just a wonderful place to go as a kid. And when I went to college, it became a stereo store. They called it World Radio, and then they closed up in the 80s, and that was it.
Mm-hmm.
But I was given by the family, I have 3 Merch tuners and 2 Alpha 374s that I'm restoring that belong to Leo.
Wow. I got one other quick question. You mentioned the Nuvo 75 meter QRP rig.
Yeah.
For AM on 5 watts, which sounds like a great inexpensive way for someone who wants to try out AM on 75 meters. But I'm wondering if you ever use that to drive a linear to get, let's say 50 watts of carrier route and maybe 200 PEP.
I have not, but I know several people who have, and it works quite well. Some of them have been using those amplifier boards you can get from the Chinese sites, and then they build their own low pass filter, of course, because those kits have no harmonic suppression.
Right.
But they've been able to get 40 watts or so out of them.
Yeah,
Thanks.
Bob Heil actually got his pine board transmitter in QST, and I believe he put that on 75 meter AM, and that was tubes.
Yeah.
They even made a kit of that at one time, I believe.
Yeah, somebody, I can't remember who it was. It was an antique radio place or something that was putting out pine board kits. I have not tried to build one of those yet.
I really haven't said anything to the other club members about this, but I actually also lived in Omaha for about 12 years, and I'm still a member of the major radio club in Omaha, which is the Exarban Amateur Radio Club, K0 USA. I have a lifetime membership with them. So having been in Omaha during that time and where you are right now, Joe, maybe you could mention, I know this is all off topic, but can you mention a little bit about the importance of Skywarn over there?
Definitely. In your area, you obviously deal with communications with wildfires and earthquakes are your primary hazards. Here, it's severe weather. And we've had lots of things like tornadoes and major hailstorms and things like that. In August, the hams were heavily involved in getting the word out when the derecho storm formed over southeast South Dakota, dipped down and hit us with 62-mile-an-hour winds, then raced across Iowa and hit Cedar Rapids with 124-mile-an-hour winds. Basically Category 3, and it lasted for over a half an hour. And so I was just there this last weekend, which is about 6 or 7 weeks after it, and town looks awful. I mean, people lost shingles, houses, all sorts of things. Trees everywhere are messed up, and
Towers.
Well, a lot of hams lost a lot of antennas. Power was out for about a week or two, depending on where you were in town. And internet is still spotty. In some places they have the power line up, but the cable line is still draped across people's yards. But there were hams all the way across from Nebraska across Iowa saying, hey, I'm measuring 92 miles an hour here. And the Weather Service was catching those reports, and they were able to issue warnings long in advance. Cedar Rapids had warnings close to an hour before it hit.
Yeah. The derecho, is that like a land-based hurricane?
Basically, but it doesn't rotate like a hurricane. It is primarily air that rushes down out of the storm. And the storm is moving forward at about 50 to 60 miles an hour. And this particular one was about 40 miles wide. And it's kind of a different kind of circulation where the wind rotates and it pushes forward. The only time you get wind from the back is when it's ending, and then it's not very strong. And so the winds that were over hurricane strength lasted for anywhere from 15 to 25 minutes, depending on where you were. And but they call it a land hurricane because it affects it like that. Actually, in this part of the Midwest, we average 1 or 2 a year, but they are not as intense as this one. Usually they're 50, 60 mile an hour winds. This one was in the neighborhood I was staying in. The sustained winds were measured at 124 with gusts to 140. Wow. Which is Category 3 to Category 4 hurricane. And imagine that in the middle of Iowa. And I have pictures I took of a AM radio station tower that was flattened and houses that were ripped apart and just endless piles of trees and debris and stuff. And it's the whole city. It's not like a narrow swath like a tornado, which could be anywhere from 50 yards to a mile wide. This thing was 40 miles wide, and the cornfields I drove by were flattened, absolutely flattened.
Yeah. I'd heard something that it was like they mowed down all of Iowa.
Yeah, in fact, if you go to YouTube and you type in like Cedar Rapids or Marion, M-A-R-I-O-N, derecho, you will see some frightening videos from these people that were just caught off guard by this thing and just started filming. And it's just amazing. In hurricanes, we don't see this high sustained wind for that long because the eye wall of the hurricane, which has the peak winds, sometimes that area is maybe only 6 miles wide. The rest is 74 miles an hour or below. And this thing, you had sustained 100-mile-an-hour winds and stuff that just went on and on and on. It is rare. It is extremely rare you have one that's this strong, and then letting out the worst winds over a major city like Cedar Rapids, which is a couple 100,000 people.
Never mind losing all the crops.
Yeah, and like I said, at my house, I knew it was coming, and I knew it had like 50, 60-mile-an-hour winds, and I was just sitting in my living room when it did, and I was listening to our net. And we had a guy who was just west of or north of Lincoln saying, "You're not going to believe how strong this thing is." And then all of a sudden at home, it just picked up, and it was just like, wow. And it went off to the east, and it curved a bit north and went right to Omaha, and then it followed north of I-80 across Iowa.
Scary. Sheesh.
Yeah, they say that as the atmosphere warms, it gives more energy to this type of storm, and they are occurring more often than they used to. I don't want to get into the politics of it because some people don't believe one way or another, but I can tell you that we've had a lot more of this type of storm, and actually in Nebraska, fewer tornadoes, but more of this type of storm.
Changes the way the temperature, the interaction of all the air layers has been modified by the change in temperatures.
Yeah, exactly. There's an area of central Nebraska around Grand Island that used to average like about a dozen tornadoes a year, and they maybe get one or so every couple of years now. So it has shifted things, and we do watch for severe weather. We've had hailstorms where the hail piles up just like snow, and we relay all that information to emergency management. And our system in Lincoln is different than a lot of places, and that is our storm spotters are out on hills like you do in other places, but we have a higher density of spotters than most places in the Midwest, and we interface directly with emergency management, and the Weather Service is kind of secondary. They are listening to us, and we're communicating to them on DMR while the net is on analog. And so they do get the information in real time, but we also have hams in the radio and TV broadcast outlets. And here, like in a lot of places, you have like 4 or 5 radio stations in one building. And so we send one ham there. And so if there's like a funnel on the ground, that thing can be moving 40 or 50 miles an hour. And in the old system, you would let the Weather Service know, who would then let emergency management know through a warning and then issue a warning. It could be 5 to 10 minutes for that warning to get to the public. Well, if I'm sitting at Channel 10 television and I hear that there's a funnel on the ground in Davie, Nebraska or something heading this way, I can write that on a note and I hand it to the weather guy who's on live television. I'm just off camera, and he now has that information and reads that to the public. And that's why when we had the 2.5 mile wide tornado in Hallam, Nebraska, about 18 years ago, I think it was, that only one person died because the warning was given before the sirens could even blow, because we were in the media outlets.
That's great. That's
So
a much better way to do it than, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da,
Yeah, exactly. And so we have a kind of a unique system here in Lincoln, and sometimes we give seminars to other groups to try and model our system. it takes a lot of cooperation between us, the Weather Service, and emergency management, and the media. And we also have people in every hospital.
Oh, that's the way to be ready.
Yeah, that way the hospitals can get people away from the windows and into the hallways. Joplin used a system like that, and that's why they were able to do well in the hospital.
Joe,
Yes.
this is David. Do you guys have a Arden system to link the hospitals?
We have a D-Star repeater that's dedicated to linking the hospitals between each other for there's an emergency volunteer medical system. And so that is done through D-Star. And the reason for that is because the average scanner does not hear that in case there's HIPAA information being transmitted back and forth, like trying to transfer a patient and do the briefing and so on. That's why we use the D-Star instead of DMR or analog FM. So the hospitals each have an ICOM radio that does both the analog and the D-Star, and they have permanent antennas and everything there and power supply. So when we send a spotter there, they just monitor the net and let the hospital emergency operator know when there's something going on that would affect them.
Thanks.
Well organized.
We try. We try. We have an unusually large club. We have about 300 members in our club, and during normal times before the pandemic, we were averaging 80 to 90 people attending each local club meeting. And when you think of a city of Lincoln the size, it's about 300,000. I don't know how that is compared to Sacramento, but to have a club that size in a city this size is pretty amazing.
That's actually kind of impressive.
It is. It is. And we do like almost 30 different public service events a year in a normal year. And that's not counting storm call outs. So we're a very, very active club. And I guess about once or twice a year, I give a talk to our club as well. In fact, I'm doing our club program a week from tonight. I'll be doing our Zoom. My current project at home, everybody wants to know what I'm working on right now. I'm doing the breadboard radio kits, will be for December and January, but I'm also doing an antenna project here. I am replacing most of the antennas and all the feed lines in the rotator. So trying to get it done before the cold weather hits. And hopefully it'll be done in about 3 weeks. And just been ordering cables and feed lines and putting connectors on and getting the rotor set to north so that when we swap out rotors, we're ready to go. The old rotor will come down, I'll rebuild that. And instead of having one pulley with 3 wire antennas, I will have 4 pulleys with 4 wire antennas, all separate so that I can raise and lower each, so that if it's below 0 and we have ice and it breaks one of the antennas, I can go out there, loosen up the rope, bring it down, splice it, put it back up. Nobody has to climb in terms of the wires. Obviously, the rotatable antennas, you can't do that, but the wires I will be able to fix easily from the ground.
Out of curiosity, with your club having such a presence and having a public presence, how is the age range in your club? Do you have a lot of younger members?
We have, when I say younger, I'm talking about guys that are in their 40s.
That's still younger.
People in their 40s. We do have some kids in the club now. I'd say about a half a dozen that are in the club. We do have, like I said, a group that are in their 40s and so forth.
Well, that's looking up because there's an awful lot of gray hairs amongst the clubs I'm aware of. So
Yeah, I'd say ours is pretty gray too, but we have some younger members as well. And part of it has to come from the history of amateur radio in Lincoln, Nebraska. Everybody wonders, how did we get this big base of hams that stayed over the years? And that's because of the legacy of high gain. High gain antennas was started in the late 50s by Andy Andros. And the plant that used to house that is less than a mile from my house. And it wasn't until I think it was 2000 or 2001 when they sold all that to MFJ. But because it was there, you had a lot of hams that worked there, because not only did they produce ham radio antennas, towers, and rotators right in the factory here in Lincoln, they also made the majority of their business was military antennas, like for tanks and jeeps and things like that. So there was a lot of RF engineers and a lot of hams.
ah, okay, a really good support network, as you might say.
Yeah, now obviously they don't make ham stuff there anymore, but they do make these things. This is one of the products that they make. That's an RE20 Electro Voice.
Oh,
And part of the process is done right here in Lincoln. And they repair them as well,
cool.
which is the standard mic in the broadcast business.
Okay.
There are also other electronics factories here in Lincoln. We have Teledyne ISCO, which makes lab equipment. We have Lycor, which makes also lab type equipment and environmental research equipment. And there's another place, I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. I think it's Loop Electronics. They make devices for the agriculture industry, things that like electronically sort cattle using RFID and things like that, all made here.
Oh, the new tags on cattle are like we put in our cats and dogs, huh?
Exactly, except these are like ear tags, and they have devices that pick off the number.
Cool. Cool.
Any more questions for Joe?
All right, I'm really glad to do these, and my email is available on QRZ. It's easy to remember my call, K0 Nebraska, K0NEB. If you need Nebraska on certain bands and modes, I can do my best. Right now, I can rotate my beam, but I don't know which way it's pointing because that's one of the things that's broken right now, and the feed lines are kind of old, so a little lossy, but I'm able to be heard quite well still until the project is done and the feed lines are all replaced with LMR 400, which will be nice to have in bad weather.
My husband and I just finished fixing our rotator for the same reason. It
Yep.
would move, but you hadn't a clue who you were facing.
Yeah, somebody told me, well, if you can't get it fixed in time for winter time, take one of those Ring doorbell cams or something and point it up and activate it and turn your rotator and put arrows on the screen or something.
He was going to send me outside to tell me which way it was pointing.
Yep.
Out through the window.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, my window does not face the right way to do that.
Yeah. Oh, I was going to have to call him on the phone and say, yep, now you're facing north, honey.
Yep. But yeah, that's the one thing I'm hoping to get fixed. And like I said, replacing old feed lines, redoing the ground network in this place, and putting lots of common mode chokes and RF chokes in the line so that I can get my Heathkit SB200, which I restored and did a 3-month article series on in CQ magazine. So I'll have about 600 watts out. So I will definitely be one of the louder signals from Nebraska once that's done.
Okay.
Not the loudest, but getting there. I'll be within half an S unit of KR0P, which is the strongest.
Hey, if we can hear you, you've done good, right?
That's right.
Do
And
you have some? Do you
I
have?
hope
Sorry, John. This is K8FT. Do you have some updating on ITKIT? You briefly mentioned ITKIT that is here somewhere in California. Do you have some more updating or?
no, I don't. You have to go to heathkit.com and it has their information. Just heathkit.com.
Yeah, I
And,
remember that basically they have not been giving that many information. There are just a few kits from what I've seen. So, but I was quite a kit builder. So because I started with the HW32 and I went all the way to the SB HW100, the 101, the SB 102, 103, and so
and
on.
I did the HW7 and HW8s. I did those. And those were fun
those
too.
were beautiful. I still have a kit that I have to do one of those days of the automatic antenna tuner. You remember the auto tuner? That was also a very nice one of the latest one.
Mm-hmm. Very good. And by the way, Giuseppe, we share a name because I know Giuseppe is Joseph. And my favorite keys here in the house are Begali's.
Oh yeah, I know. I am a good friend of him. So, and every time, I mean, we used to met at Dayton, but this year, I mean, everything was virtual, and so yeah, I've seen there, but basically on the internet, nothing else. But yeah, yes, beautiful keys. He's doing great.
Yeah, I have a couple of them. Really enjoy. I have a straight key and paddle, and really enjoy them.
Probably you have also a lot of callings over there. I mean, being so close to Cedar Rapids, and you must have a lot of.
Actually, we're about 330 miles from there, and I was there last weekend because there was a small ham fest in southeast Iowa, which was probably a little under half the normal attendance, and it was the first ham fest I'd been to since February. And most of it was outdoors. So, of course, most people wore masks, but most of it was outside flea market. And, but yeah, I'm quite a ways from Cedar Rapids. It takes about 5 hours.
Yeah, but you had one of the largest calling surplus dealer there, Nebraska Surplus.
Surplus Sales. Yeah, they are in downtown Omaha. And you cannot shop in their store. You can only order online. And every once in a while, they'll let me pick up something there. But you can't browse the aisles there. But they are in Omaha.
Yeah, they used to be, I mean, one of the largest calling surplus dealer. I know I got a lot of parts for the HF380 and so on. They had really huge amount. Not so much anymore, but they used to be really one of the largest calling surplus dealer.
And that's the fun of going to Hamfest around Cedar Rapids, is because there's a lot of Collins stuff. It's all there.
I still have a lot of callings, but it's there. I have to restore one of those days. Joe, thanks so much for the presentation. Really.
Oh, I'm glad to do
nice.
it. And thank you for your hospitality. And someday I hope to come out there.
Yeah.
I've never been to Sacramento, and at the very least, I know I'm going to go to Visalia when they start that up again.
Yep.
We work a lot when I was still in Italy. My Italian call sign was I1MOL, and I remember the K0NEB.
Yep. Well, thank you.
Well.
Thank you. I try to put in a good signal into Europe, and it's surprising to do that from the Midwest.
Yeah, but you were doing great from what I remember.
Yep.
That's cool, Joe to Joe.
That's right. My neighbors were Italian growing up in Omaha, and they'd call me Giuseppe.
Ah.
All right. Any last questions for Joe, or should we wrap up? All right. Well, thanks for joining us, Joe. This has been great. A lot of good info, and I've taken some notes and some kits I'm going to go look up and maybe order online. So, yeah, thanks for all the suggestions, and it was a great presentation. Thank you. Thanks for joining us.
And if anybody has any questions, they can email joe@k0neb.com.
Great. Thanks very much. All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll wrap up.
you.
the meeting.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks, everyone. All right. Bye.
Good night.